The number one question I get when people find out that I'm into health and wellness, they say, well, what am I supposed to eat? And it's a simple question, but it's not a simple answer. I can't just give you one word answer here. There's more to it than that. There's a lot of confusion out there. Some people say, well, we should eat low carb. Others say, no, the secret to health is low fat. Others might say, no, it's carnivore. You got to go carnivore if you want to be healthy. Other people will say, no, it's vegetarianism or veganism. Some people might say, no, it's food sensitivities. You got to go with the FODMAP diet. Well, there's a lot of different recommendations out there, and it can get confusing pretty fast. There is such a concept called metabolic individuality, and ultimately a diet needs to be customized for the individual. But I'm going to give you some high-level things in this episode, and I'm going to give you some of the basics to nutrition. Welcome to the Christian Healthy Lifestyle Podcast, where I help Christians over 40 maximize their health potential so they can age gracefully and live abundantly. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 162. Well, we're moving through the 9 pillars of health, and we're starting this section on the body, and we're at pillar number 7, which is nutrition. Now, the mnemonic for the body is food, move, and snooze. So food is nutrition, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. The number one question I get when people find out that I'm into health and wellness, they say, well, what am I supposed to eat? And it's a simple question, but it's not a simple answer. I can't just give you one word answer here. There's more to it than that. But I'm going to give you some guidelines in just a little bit. But in order to understand my recommendations a little better, I want to give you some background on my approach to health in general. Now, if you listen to the show often, you've heard this before, but I'd like to repeat this. There's a concept called vitalism in naturopathy, and that is our bodies have a God-given built-in intelligence, and we don't have to teach our cells how to do their jobs. They already know how to do their jobs. Our job is to get the obstacles out of the way and let our bodies do what they already know how to do, that is to heal and to thrive. So how do we get the obstacles out of the way? Well, we give our bodies less of what they don't want and more of what they need. Now, a great way of looking at this is to consider that we have health blocking factors and we have health enhancing factors. So the way I like to look at this is imagine a 2x4 straddled across a couple of sawhorses. And the empty 2x4 is strong and durable. Think 21-year-old Olympic athlete. Well, I could start stacking bricks on top of that 2x4, and it could handle a few bricks no problem. But if I kept stacking bricks, that 2x4 is going to start to sag a little bit. It's going to bend. And if I keep stacking bricks, there's going to come a point where my 2x4 will snap and break. Well, in this metaphor, the bricks are health blocking factors, things like sedentary lifestyle or smoking or stress or social isolation and loneliness. Those kinds of things will all serve to impede our health and wellness. And when the 2x4 snaps, that's when we get diagnosed with some kind of disease. So my question is, was the problem the last brick that we put on top? Or was the problem the total load of bricks underneath? The bigger problem is the total load of bricks underneath. So that brings up the concept of total body load. If we want to build health and wellness, we want to reduce our total body load by eliminating health blocking factors. Now, that's not a complete metaphor. As good as that is, it doesn't explain the whole thing completely because we want to add in health enhancing factors. So imagine we have a seesaw, and on one side of the seesaw, we have health enhancing factors. In the other, we have health blocking factors. Well, we want to build a lopsided seesaw where we have far more health enhancing factors on our seesaw than the health blocking factors. That's basically the naturopathic approach to health. So now back to the question, what should I eat? Now, there's a lot of confusion out there. Some people say, well, we should eat low carb. Others say, no, the secret to health is low fat. Others might say, no, it's carnivore. You got to go carnivore if you want to be healthy. Other people will say, no, it's vegetarianism or veganism. And other people will say, no, it's Mediterranean or Whole30 is the key, or paleo. Some people might say, no, it's food sensitivities. You got to go with the FODMAP diet. Well, there's a lot of different recommendations out there, and it can get confusing pretty fast. So one of the things all those different diets have in common is that they all recommend non-processed food. So when we eliminate processed food, we eliminate a lot of the junk and a lot of the health blocking factors. So by giving our bodies less of what they don't want, we can see results. We can see improvement to our health, and many people often do. And that's why people get sold out on their eating plan, because they changed and they did a certain diet and they saw results, or they saw results in their clients. And they say, okay, this is the way it should work for everybody. But there is such a concept called metabolic individuality, and ultimately a diet needs to be customized for the individual. But I'm going to give you some high-level things in this episode, and I'm going to give you some of the basics to nutrition. Now, you know, if you've been listening to the show for any length of time, that I like to tie in Scripture with anything we talk about on health and wellness. But if you look at the Scriptures, the Bible is pretty short on specifics when it comes to food as to what we should eat. Sure, there are some dietary guidelines in Leviticus, but we don't live by the law anymore. So what are we supposed to eat? There are a few verses that give us some clues as to what we should eat. One of them is 1 Corinthians 6:12. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated or mastered by anything. So that tells us that we're free to eat anything we want, but if you do that, it's not going to be beneficial. It may not be beneficial, right? So we have to choose. We have to pick and choose what we want to eat. So when it comes to food, we no longer live by the dietary law restrictions in the Old Testament. We can be a little bit more pragmatic and say, well, what's working? Some people say, what would Jesus eat? Well, I would say Jesus would eat non-processed, single-ingredient foods. That's what he would focus on, and I think we should do the same. Now, I would recommend eating organic, and some people ask me, is there a biblical foundation for eating organic? I haven't found that. Well, actually, there is. It's 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. Now, this passage is talking about people who are being influenced by evil spirits and imposing false doctrine and restrictions on people that God never intended. So picking it up in verse 3, they forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and who know the truth. For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving. So don't miss the phrase, food which God created. So that brings up a really important point. Food made by God in nature is always healthier than food made by man in a laboratory. So natural, organic, non-processed food is always best. So the number one rule for healthy eating is this: eat food as close to its God-given natural form as possible. Now, we can't always do that. There's going to be times where we are going to eat some level of processed food. It's just impossible to live on this earth without doing that these days. We'd have to live on a farm and grow your own produce and raise your own animals, slaughter them. It would be very, very difficult at any time to do that 100%. So no, we're not going to be perfect. We're not going to execute 100%, but that is the ideal, as close to its God-given natural form as possible. The more man gets his hands on our food supply, the worse it is for us. If it comes in a box or a wrapper or through a window, it's suspect. So eat more single-ingredient foods from the butcher section of the grocery store, or the produce section of the grocery store. If it's in a package, strive for less than 5 or 6 ingredients. If you're reading the ingredients list and you come across something that you just can't pronounce, you're probably better off putting that product back on the shelf. If you see an ingredient that you wouldn't be able to buy yourself in a regular grocery store, put it back on the shelf. That's processed food. That's man-made chemicals. Our bodies weren't designed to ingest that stuff. So yes, I recommend eating organic whenever possible. So a lot of people are confused as to what organic is. But in, I think it was 2002, the USDA passed the organic standards. So today, when you see that green USDA organic standard on a label on a product, that means that product has met the organic standard. And here it is. Something that is certified organic has no chemical fertilizers, no chemical herbicides or pesticides like Roundup for weeds and those kinds of things, no human sewage sludge, there's no genetic modification, non-GMO. there's no irradiation, and in the case of livestock, there's no routine use of antibiotics and no growth hormones. So that's the organic standard. And the farmer has to be practicing those standards for 3 years before he gets the organic certification. So it's a pretty strict standard, and there's some real stiff penalties for violating that standard. That's another question I get quite frequently. They say, well, you're paying a lot more for organic. How do you know if it really is organic? Well, if you've got a food supplier that's telling you it's organic and they get caught cheating that standard, it's going to ruin their business. So I don't think people are too motivated to cheat on that. I'm sure some do, right? But for the most part, there are some stiff standards in place, and a legitimate farmer is not going to risk that problem. They're going to be honest. So we should also understand that there's different levels of organic. There is 100% organic, which is kind of hard to find in a packaged food. 100% organic would be produce, maybe organic squash or organic spinach, single ingredient foods. They could do that pretty easily. But once you start mixing ingredients together, you'll see some non-organic ingredients creeping in. So 100% organic will obviously be able to use the organic seal. It can be labeled organic. And if it's produce, there's going to be a sticker on that, whether it's an orange or a grapefruit or a pear or whatever it is. That sticker is going to have a number on it. In organic produce, the number will start with 9. And the non-organic produce, it starts with a 4, usually several numbers long. 4, 5, or 6 numbers long. But organic produce starts with a 9, and non-organic produce starts with a 4. So that's important to look at when you're at the grocery store. Now, there's another standard, which is just called organic, and that means at least 95% of the ingredients, excluding salt and water, are organic, are certified organic. So those products, again, they can use the USDA organic seal, and it can be labeled organic. There's another standard as well. It's called made with organic ingredients. And those products are 70% organic at least. Now, if that's the case, they cannot use the USDA organic logo, and they can't label the food organic. Now, there's an even lower level of organic certification, and that is someone could just have some organic ingredients in there. And the standard is less than 70%. So if a product has less than 70% organic ingredients, they cannot use the USDA organic logo, they cannot label it as organic, and they have to state that it's made with organic ingredients, but there's somewhere on the label has to say less than 70%. So one of the big differences here is an organic farmer will use natural fertilizers. They'll use other things on the farm to help cultivate the soil and have it produce nutrients for the produce that they grow. When you use chemical nitrogen-based fertilizers, you can get the produce to grow really fast, but that fast growth comes at a cost. Those chemicals, along with the chemical herbicides and pesticides, they strip the soil of naturally occurring nutrients. Organic soil treated properly with natural fertilizers and natural pesticides and herbicides, the way nature intended, will produce its own nitrogen and a lot of other nutrients as well. So producing nutrient-dense plants and livestock starts with nutrient-dense soil. And proper soil care requires more attention and more time, a little bit more work, well, probably a lot more work. So the crops have to be rotated. The soil needs to rest and not produce any usable crops every few years. I believe it's about every 7 years is what the Bible recommends, that you should rest your soil once every 7 years and give the soil a chance to recuperate. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides will deplete the soil of its nutritional value. And nutrient-deficient soil produces nutrient-deficient plants. Nutrient-deficient plants produce nutrient-deficient livestock, and people eating produce and livestock that are nutrient-deficient produces nutrient-deficient people. So we should eat organic whenever possible. Now, there's another concept to consider here, and that is, are you extracting all the nutrients from your food? You are what you eat is true, but more accurately, we are what we absorb. Now, anyone over 40 has lost some capacity to produce digestive enzymes and bile salts, digestive juices, which impair our ability to extract nutrients from the food that we eat. It's pretty easy to do something about that. That's why I put together my digestive support protocol on my full script supplement dispensary. I've curated some quality digestive enzymes, as well as bile salts if you need them, and some liquid bitters that help stimulate our body's own digestive juices when we're about ready to eat. My protocols are for my listeners only, the Natural Nation. So if you've already created a FullScript account with my dispensary, just log in a FullScript and click on the multi-patient protocols, and you'll see them all there. If not, you can go to my website, christianhealthylifestyle.com/protocols, create a free account, and you'll get immediate access to all my protocols, including the digestive support. You'll also lock in a 10% discount for life. Now, creating a FullScript account today is a real win-win because you get quality products at a discount price, and you'll be supporting the show when you do because I make a small commission with your purchase. It's a real win-win. You have my permission to pause this episode right now, go create your account, and come back, listen when you can. I promise I'll be here when you get back, promise. So the organic standard is a good one, but we want to go beyond organic. And that's why I wore my shirt today, my Beyond Organic shirt. Beyond Organic is a company, they're no longer in business, but it was started by Jordan Rubin, who started Garden of Life supplement line. And it was organic, beyond organic food delivered to your door. It was a great concept, but maybe a little bit before its time. It didn't work out. But beyond organic means we're going to be raising animals and producing crops that meet the organic standard, but there's more to it than that. Beef should be pasture raised, preferably regeneratively raised. A regenerative farmer prioritizes the soil health, which is the foundation of a healthy ecosystem. They use practices like cover cropping, crop rotation, and minimal tillage to regenerate the soil. Animals are given the opportunity to live as they would in the wild. They have free access to pastures, sunlight, and natural mating practices. Grass is a cow's natural diet. Not just grass either. They might eat clovers and other short green things growing in the field, but they're not designed to eat grains. Beef should be grass-fed and grass-finished. Now, what that means is the cow is raised on grass, and they eat grass, 100% grass-fed diet, until they go to slaughter. Now, there are some practices out there that say, well, yeah, it's grass-fed beef, but the last 90 days, they switch those cows over to a grain-based diet to fatten them up. And if that happens, the grass-fed portion of that cow's life doesn't really amount to much because the fat content gets distorted and the meat is just not as healthy as it could be because a grain-based diet is an unnatural diet for a cow. You can feed a cow organic grains and you can still call it organic meat, but that's not the best diet for a cow. Cows are ruminant animals. They shouldn't eat grains. They would never eat grains in the wild. If they do, their stomachs become too acidic, which prevents the proper fermentation of the bacteria that they need to properly digest their food. Now, most food sold in the grocery stores and restaurants are factory farmed, and the animals are fed commercial feed out of a feeding trough. Now, even the high-end steakhouses even brag about, right on the menus, they'll say 100%, our beef is 100% grain-fed marbleized beef. Well, if you're going to have an unhealthy cow, you might want to add some fat back in to add some flavor in. And that's what they call marbleized, when there's fat streaks running through the beef. That's what happens when you have grains fed to a cow. A real grass-fed cow, pastured, regeneratively raised cow, won't need the marbleized. The taste, the flavor will just be there all on its own. And once you get used to grass-fed beef, you won't want to go back to the stuff that isn't. It's so much of a better, more robust flavor. It's amazing. So hopefully you're already doing that. Grass-fed and grass-finished is what we're looking for in our beef. You see, our federal government heavily subsidizes corn and soy. So animal feed made from subsidized crops is artificially cheap. So most farmers, either through ignorance or a desire to squeeze more profits out of their production processes, opt for commercial grain-based feed that's primarily corn and soy. That's true for poultry as well. Now, poultry and eggs should be pasture-raised, not cage-free. Cage-free, they're playing some games with that. You can label your eggs cage-free, but those chickens could be living in some pretty tough living conditions. Here's a photo of the inside of one of these chicken coops. And no, these chickens are not in cages, but that's not exactly a healthy living environment. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, you may want to check out the YouTube version and see some of the images that I'm going to have for you in this episode. It's kind of worth checking out. Yeah, so these conditions are not great for chickens. There's really no room for them to move. They're right on top of one another. They're living in filthy environments. It's not good. So cage-free is not a good standard for your eggs or your poultry. So moving it up a notch, you want chickens to eat a natural diet, and turkeys as well. A chicken and a turkey are omnivores. They're not vegetarians. They're supposed to eat animal-based as well as plant-based products. So they should be eating insects, foraging for worms in the soil, looking for seeds. They're not supposed to be 100% vegetarian fed with corn and soy. When they are, it distorts their fat content and it makes the meat less healthy. So if you want a good piece of chicken or turkey, you got to find a quality source, and it's hard to find. One of the sources that I use is called North Star Bison. They sell chickens and turkeys that are fed a natural diet that's not corn and soy based. It's pretty hard to find. I'll put a link in the show notes to North Star Bison. You might find that a very useful source. Now, seafood should be wild caught, not farm raised. Farm raised fish run into the same problems that factory farmed cattle and poultry do, and that is they're eating an unnatural diet and sometimes they're living in their own excrement. By the way, never eat tilapia. Tilapia is almost always farm raised, and the conditions that they're raised in are sometimes pretty disgusting. So stay away from tilapia at all costs. Some fish are what they call sustainably raised. They might be raised in the ocean or a lake, in some kind of a cove or bay of some sort, and they're fenced in with a net, but they're actually fed an unnatural diet, and those unnatural ingredients will settle to the bottom of wherever the fish are living, and it distorts the soil on the bottom and starts to corrupt that ecosystem, and the normal vegetation can't grow. The water starts to become more polluted because it has less oxygen content, and the healthy ecosystem gets disrupted. So it's not the healthiest way to go. So it sounds good. Yeah, they're going to be farm raising these fish in the ocean, but there's problems there as well. When it comes to any seafood, fish or shellfish, look for wild caught, not farm raised. Now, when it comes to seafood, the larger the fish, the more mercury content is going to be in the flesh of that fish, because the higher up the food chain they go, the more mercury will accumulate in each one of those larger and larger fish along the way. So avoid large fish like swordfish, shark, mackerel, big-eyed tuna. Focus on smaller fish like salmon, trout, herring, or sardines. Now, another major consideration when it comes to healthy eating is you should be avoiding seed oils, or what they call vegetable oils. There's actually no such thing as a vegetable oil. They're highly processed seed oils. Now, seed oils were originally used, they weren't even considered food when they first got invented, and they were originally used for machinery lubrication, but then they found they could extract the toxic ingredients out of them, and they could actually start putting them in food, and that happened at the turn of the 20th century. And since then, we've seen chronic degenerative disease skyrocket, and researchers keep scratching their heads saying, what's going on? Well, I think what's going on is we are over-consuming these polyunsaturated fats in the form of highly processed seed oils. It's a big deal, so we want to avoid them whenever we can. Polyunsaturated fatty acids have multiple double bonds that make them susceptible to spoilage with heat, light, and pressure. Now, I go into a deep dive in this in episodes 141 and 142. If this is a topic that interests you and you'd like to go deeper on that, you can listen to those episodes. But just real quick, those seed oils are highly processed, cheap, unnatural food ingredients, and they're very common in processed foods and in restaurants. So if you want to avoid seed oils, you got to really cut back on the amount of processed food you're eating and the amount of restaurant visits you partake in, because restaurants just don't know any better and they just keep using them. You want to reduce your polyunsaturated fatty acids, or the worst one is linoleic acid. You want to reduce that to less than 2% of your caloric intake. You can't totally eliminate it, nor would you want to. We do need some polyunsaturated fatty acids, but nowhere near the amounts that we're getting in a standard American diet. The standard American diet has about 20% polyunsaturated fatty acids, and it's extraordinarily unhealthy. So never cook with vegetable oils or eat anything deep fried in a restaurant. It's really, really toxic to our bodies. The best oils for cooking are ghee, beef tallow, coconut oil, and butter. And you might be saying, well, wait a minute, Dave, don't those oils have saturated fat in them? Yes, they do. And we shouldn't be afraid of saturated fat because it's actually a health food, contrary to popular belief. Again, this may be a foreign concept to you. Listen to episodes 141 and 142. I go into a deep dive there, but I want to point out a couple of studies here that prove what I'm talking about. We've been misled for some time, and in some cases out and out lied to, about the health benefits of replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fats in the form of highly processed seed oils. Now, they've been trying to prove this for some time, but they can't. And the truth is, the research is stacking up now that this lipid hypothesis, this idea that we need to cut back on saturated fat and eat more polyunsaturated fat in order to avoid heart disease, it's been debunked. It's been completely disproven, but the information is not getting out there. So I want to take this opportunity to just go over a couple of studies here in the published literature that I think you're going to find very interesting. One is the Framingham Heart Study. The other is the Minnesota Coronary Experiment. And the other is the Mr. Fit, or the Multiple Risk Factor Intervention Trial. Now, the Framingham Heart Study, it's been the longest study on heart disease that's ever been undertaken. It started in 1948, and it's still ongoing. It's going to this day. Now, 6 years into the study, the researchers announced that they saw a connection between total cholesterol and heart disease deaths. So they ran with it and they said, yeah, that's it. We've got to lower our cholesterol at all costs. But then in 1978, there was a 30-year follow-up to the Framingham Heart Study, and the connection between serum cholesterol and heart disease deaths became much less clear. The study director at the time said this: for each 1% milligram per deciliter drop of cholesterol, there was an 11% increase in coronary and total mortality. That was exactly the opposite of what the researchers expected to find. That is, when saturated fat intake and cholesterol go down, all-cause mortality goes up. So it's devastating to the lipid hypothesis, but we still have this thing lingering out there because people are getting a lot of misinformation. Now, another really damning study to this whole idea of saturated fat is being bad for us is the Minnesota Coronary Experiment. Now, the Minnesota Coronary Experiment took place from 1968 to 1973, but the results didn't make it into the published literature and remained buried for more than 40 years. Now, it came out, and there was an article published in the British Medical Journal that talked about the results from this study. It was a well-designed study. They had a captive audience. They were either in a retirement home or state mental hospitals. So in those institutions, they were able to have 100% control over what the participants ate. They didn't just take surveys and ask people what they ate. They actually had 100% control over what they ate. So people were randomized into two groups. The facilities had complete control over what the two groups ate, and it was double blind. None of the participants knew which diet they were getting, and not even the servers knew. So it was completely double blind. They didn't speculate as to what the cause of death was. They actually performed autopsies. They didn't guess. Now, this study is the one everyone's been waiting for. But as I said, it stayed buried for 40 years because the results were not supporting the lipid hypothesis, and researchers had way too much invested in that lipid hypothesis in the form of government funding for more research to give up on the idea. So they buried the information from this study. It's really tragic. Now, the study results were finally published in the British Medical Journal in 2014. And this article was called Reevaluation of the Traditional Diet Heart Hypothesis, Analysis of Recovered Data from the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, 1968 to 1973. The Minnesota Coronary Experiment was designed to test whether replacement of saturated fat with vegetable oils rich in linoleic acid could reduce coronary heart disease and death by lowering serum cholesterol. So here's what they said. Recovered MCE unpublished documents and raw data were analyzed according to the hypothesis specified by original investigators. Results. The intervention group had significant reduction in serum cholesterol compared with controls. There was no evidence of benefit in the intervention group for coronary atherosclerosis or myocardial infarcts. In fact, as cholesterol went down, heart disease and all-cause mortality went up. There it is again. So here's what they said in their conclusions. Available evidence from randomized controlled trials shows that replacement of saturated fat in the diet with linoleic acid effectively lowers serum cholesterol, but does not support the hypothesis that this translates to a lower risk of death from coronary heart disease or all causes. Isn't that staggering? I bet you haven't heard that before unless you listen to this podcast. Then the third study I want to talk about here is the Mr. Fit. It's the Multiple Risk Factor Intervention Trial. And it went on from 1973 to 1982. And it was one of the biggest and most demanding medical experiments ever performed on a group of human beings. It involved 28 medical centers nationwide, and it cost more than $115 million to execute. Researchers looked at 361,000 middle-aged American men, and they found 12,000 with cholesterol above 290. Half of them received multiple interventions. They got counseling to quit smoking. They were given medications to lower high blood pressure if necessary, and they were given advice on how to follow a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet. And the other half were told to just keep doing what you're doing. Don't change a thing. Eat whatever you want. Both groups were followed for 7 years. The results that were announced in 1982 were another disaster for the diet heart hypothesis. Although men in the intervention group had been spectacularly successful in changing their diets, quitting smoking, and reducing their blood pressure, they died at slightly higher rates than the controls for the people that did nothing. And that's not the end of the story either. In a 16-year follow-up study released in 1997, they found that the treatment group had higher rates of lung cancer, even though 21% of them had quit smoking compared to only 6% of the controls, the people that did nothing. That's another staggering number there. Pretty surprising, huh? Oh yeah, the diet heart hypothesis has been thoroughly debunked. It's time to let saturated fat out of jail and consider it as the health food that it actually is. Healthy, saturated fat in the form of butter, ghee, lard, and tallow. There's a lot more to say on this. Listen to episodes 141 and 142. Those episodes are a real eye-opener. I think you'll enjoy them. Now, there's a couple of other nutrients here that you don't hear an awful lot about, and that is air and water. So we can live for weeks without food. We can live for days without water, but only a couple of minutes without air. So air is really, really important. We want to strongly consider the quality of the air we're breathing. Now, the first thing we want to do when it comes to getting quality air is breathe diaphragmatically. A lot of people chest breathe. When we inhale, our diaphragm should raise when we're breathing in, not the chest. If the chest is expanding like this as we're breathing, we're chest breathing. And that creates stress and you're not breathing as efficiently. If you want to see this in action, look at a newborn baby with a diaper. Lying there with nothing but a diaper on, you'll see their stomach raising because they need all the help they can get to breathe when they just start breathing. So they're breathing properly when they're born. But through stress, we teach ourselves to breathe inappropriately, and that is by chest breathing, like this. That is not as good a way to breathe, and you're going to deprive your body of needed oxygen. Another thing to consider is get outdoors whenever you can. Get some fresh air. It means a lot. You can open your windows, and that will help get some fresh air into the house if the season allows. You could also get some houseplants. Houseplants will filter the air and provide oxygen. Good houseplants are philodendron, peace lilies, Chinese evergreen, and a parlor palm, a small palm tree. They'll all live very, very easily in the house indoors, and that'll help clean the air a little bit, make your air a little bit more palatable. The other nutrient that we need to consider is water. Now, I know a lot of people are drinking water out of plastic bottles these days, which is maybe better than drinking tap water, but that plastic contaminates the water, especially if that plastic bottle has been sitting in the sun, which often happens in storage. So if you have a plastic bottle sitting in the sun and it's getting hot, you're literally making plastic tea. And when you drink that water, you'll be drinking some level of plastic. So get away from plastic bottles when you can. Glass is best thing to drink out of. If you can't drink out of glass, use stainless steel. There's a lot of decent stainless steel water bottles on the market. That's worth doing. Get away from the plastic when you can. Now, filtered water is okay, but spring water is best. Flowing water on the surface of a river or a stream is subject to pollution, including animal waste. So water flowing under the ground, an underground stream, is God's design for clean, pure water. It's expensive at the store. One of the ways to drink spring water is to get it delivered to your house with 5-gallon glass jugs. I get mine. Sometimes I get it from Mountain Valley Spring Water. They're out of Arkansas, and it's delicious spring water. Really, really good stuff. If you can do that, get set up with a water dispenser in your house, like one of those office water dispensers. You can put this 5-gallon jug on. That'll help reduce the cost quite a bit. If that's not doable, you can always use reverse osmosis filter. Now, reverse osmosis is the only filter I know of that will filter out the fluoride that most municipalities put in the water. Now, fluoride is just another whole story. It's not a useful nutrient. It's poison. It's toxic. That's why if you look on the toothpaste that has fluoride added, they say right on there, if you consume more than what's on a toothbrush full, call your local poison control center. So that's because there's fluoride in there. It's toxic to the body. We don't want to be drinking that in our water. It's a foolish thing to do. So you can filter that out with reverse osmosis, but reverse osmosis is so good at filtering that it also filters out many of the micronutrients and minerals in there. So you don't want to be drinking nutrient deficient or mineral deficient water because the water needs certain minerals in there. And if it doesn't have it, it will leach those minerals right from its surrounding environment. It's supposed to do that in the ground, right? But if it's inside your body and it doesn't have the minerals it needs, it will leach the minerals from your tissue. So it's not a good idea to drink reverse osmosis water that you haven't remineralized. Now, if you go to my full script dispensary that we talked about earlier, I've got some mineral drops on the Daily Essentials protocol. And if you're using RO water, you can just put a few drops of this mineral supplement into the water that you're filtering, and it will remineralize the water, and it'll be a lot better for you. If you don't have a full script account, go to my website, christianhealthylifestyle.com/protocols, create an account. You'll get access to all my protocols, and you'll lock in a 10% discount for life. Again, the protocol with the mineral drops is called Daily Essentials. Now, don't go anywhere. Stick around for next week's episode. I'm going to be talking about pillar number 8, which is movement. And I promise it's not just exercise. There's a lot more to it than that. I'm doing my best to serve you well, and I would like to reach more people. The natural and holistic health from a Christian biblical perspective is hard to come by. And if you've got a like-minded friend, I sure would appreciate you sharing the episode with them. The easiest way to do that is to go to my website, christianhealthylifestyle.com/the episode number. This is episode number 162. Copy that URL and text it to a friend. I'll bet they'll thank you for it. That's it for now. I appreciate you. Thanks for listening. Go out there and age gracefully and live abundantly. I'll talk with you next time. Be blessed.